and Christians, no fault of their own, are reading their corrupted translations, and as a result, they are in the church. I'm here to tell you, let's get back to the original. The key point is in that Hebrews chapter 10, verse 5, the author says the following. The author says that sacrifices and offerings you did not desire, but a body you had prepared for me, burnt offerings and sin offerings you have not required. Here's the problem. That is a putative quote of the book of Psalms, Psalms chapter 40, but the key point is the book of Hebrews, the author, deliberately altered the Hebrew Bible in order to make it appear Christological. It doesn't say what Hebrews 10:5 says it says. Again, Hebrews 10:5 claims that the passage says, sacrifices and offerings you didn't desire, but a body you have prepared for me. Now, as you guessed, the most provocative part of that passage is a body you have prepared for me. If you go back to Psalm 40, verse 6 or 7, depending if you use a Jewish Bible or Christian Bible, you'll realize immediately it doesn't say that there. Psalm 40 says rather, Oznayim karisoli, my ears you have opened. It's very critical. So the author of Hebrews deliberately, malevolently, promiscuously altered the Hebrew Bible in order to make it appear Christological. And what's very striking about this is if you opened up a Christian Bible, if you opened a New International Version or a King James Bible, you would notice that they cross-reference each other. If you went to Psalm 40, it would tell you that this passage is quoted in Hebrews 10:5, and if you look at Hebrews 10:5 in a NIV or King James Bible, it really doesn't matter. It would tell you that this passage comes from Psalm 40, verse 6 and 7. You would notice also immediately that in the Christian Bible itself, in Psalm 40 it says, my ears you have opened, and the King James Hebrews 10:5 says, a body prepared. So it becomes transparent, even using the Christian Bible, that the author of the book of Hebrews deliberately altered this text. This is not like a scribal error. Those things happen. This was a corruption. This was a misappropriation, very deliberate. And Christians, unfortunately, not only don't know any better, but scratch their heads when they're reading the book of Hebrews, when they read the book of Hebrews and wonder, why are my Jewish friends so hard-hearted? Why don't they see this there? Now, most Christians wouldn't know this, but as you can imagine, when Christians saw my video, they went online, and missionaries have figured out what seems to be a clever way around this problem. And that is, missionaries would tell you that, but if you look at the Septuagint, you would find that in the Septuagint, they would say, the Greek translation of the Bible, they would say, that translation composed by 70 or 72 rabbis, they would say, about 250 years before the Christian era, they would say, meaning people who didn't have an axe to grind, they would say, it says in the Septuagint, a body you prepared for me. I don't know if you understand the magnitude of this argument, which seems very persuasive at first glance. The Septuagint, we are told, is the oldest translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. That's what missionaries will say to you. And in the Septuagint, that was rendered around 250 BCE, when we look at Psalm 40, it says, a body prepared for me, and then they would claim that the writers of the New Testament were simply quoting from the Septuagint rather than from the Hebrew Bible. That's just the way the argument goes. This argument is completely preposterous for many reasons. Reason number one, the original Septuagint that was created roughly 2,250 years ago for the Alexandrian Library was only of the 5 books of Moses. This is not controversial. People don't know this because they just don't look it up. But any source for it, whether it's the letter of Aristide, whether it's Josephus, whether it's the Talmud, whether it's Jerome, it doesn't make a difference. The original Septuagint was only of the Chumshei Torah, the Pentateuch, the Law of Moses. The book of Psalms, however, is not part of the 5 books of Moses, meaning the original Septuagint that missionaries happily, gleefully point to did not translate the book of Psalms. It's just that simple. The whole thing is a scam. It goes further. Christian missionaries might push back and say, but there were Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible rendered after that original, what's called a proto-Septuagint was created. That proto-Septuagint does not exist any longer. The Alexandrian library was destroyed. It was destroyed many times over. We no longer have a surviving copy of the original Septuagint. As it turns out, in the ancient world, Greek was the lingua de franco. Greek was kind of like the English language in that region of the world, meaning it was the common language. And as it turns out, there were many attempts to translate the Hebrew Bible into the Greek language. This became a cottage industry. And the church began to do this. The theologian, the church doctor, the church father, as he may be called, Origen. He's a 3rd century genius. Origen was one of only 2 church fathers who was completely fluent in both Hebrew and Greek. Origen is responsible for our current Septuagint. What happens is the church shapes, fashions a Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that would comport with all the mistranslations found in the New Testament. I hope you can wrap your brain around this. So what happens is the church produces a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that would provide a net, would be able to support the mistranslations found in the New Testament. Follow? So it wasn't that the writers of the New Testament were using the Septuagint. That's silly. It goes without saying that the Septuagint is never mentioned in the Christian Bible. This whole deal that the writers of the New Testament relied on the Septuagint is made up. There's nowhere in the Christian Bible where there's any statement that someone was using the Septuagint. It doesn't exist. The Septuagint is never mentioned in the Christian Bible. Now, this refrain that they were relying on the Septuagint is stated ad nauseum, but that's not the way it worked. The Septuagint that we have in our hands, meaning the one that you can find online, that you can order from Amazon, that Septuagint ultimately is the product of the church. Origen is its most important editor. And when you're speaking to a Christian, the Christian says, no, there were earlier Septuagints than the advent of Christianity. It means before the year 1 that supported this reading. What you should do, what I always do when speaking to a Christian, you watch me do this, what is your source? That needs to be your question. When a missionary claims that the authors of the New Testament used a Septuagint that predates the year 1, ask him for evidence. There is no evidence because it's made up. It's a lie. It's not true. Listen, guys, a translation can never be superior to an original. Never. This is a part of law not only in the Western world. This is understood, and it's logical and intuitive. A translation can never be superior to an original. Never. This is called the law of best evidence, and therefore I deeply encourage you to go back to the original text. Realize that the author of Hebrews and Matthew and the other writers of the New Testament altered the Hebrew Bible in order to make it appear Christological, and Christians, no fault of their own, are reading their corrupted translations, and as a result they are in the church. I'm here to tell you, let's get back to the original. If we read the original Hebrew, we'll turn back to the God of Israel. You know exactly who the Messiah is and who he isn't. Let's pray that we see the coming of the true Messiah quickly in our time. Shalom. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו כל